a red slash through it. That means I'm unmuted.
That means you're muted.
Yeah, well,
Take the red slash out of it, and then you can see a microphone.
Hey, Vicky, can you hear us?
yes, hi.
Hi.
Thanks.
Okay, great. We'll get started here in a second, Vicky.
That's fine.
You close that door so you don't hear the back window.
Okay.
Don't pick it.
Okay. I have it at 2 o'clock, and so for the sake of being prompt, we'll go ahead and get started and call the Planning Regular Commission meeting on Tuesday, May 2nd at 2 p.m. to order. Stephanie, should we do a roll call?
Commissioner Byers?
Here.
Commissioner Hall?
Here.
Commissioner Rigsby?
Here.
Commissioner Williams?
Here,
Absent is Commissioner Baugh, Commissioner McAlina, and Commissioner Richardson. Also present is Samantha and Stephanie for the Village of Ruidoso. You do have a quorum.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. At this time, we'll open it up for declarations of conflict of interest. I don't believe there should be any today with Chapter 54 rewrite, but. No. Okay. Perfect. Moving on to certification of compliance. Stephanie, are we compliant with Resolution 2023-01?
I do certify that the meeting was posted in accordance with Resolution 2023-01 and in compliance with Section 5440 of the Municipal Code.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the approval of the agenda or discussion on the agenda. Do we need to add anything else?
I move that we approve the May 2nd, 2023 agenda.
Great. I have a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second from anyone?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Commissioner Byers?
Aye.
Commissioner Hall?
Aye.
Commissioner Rigsby?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
aye.
Motion carries.
Great. For number 4, approval of the regular meeting minutes of April 4th, 2023. For the commissioners, anything to change or add for the meeting minutes for the last meeting?
Chairman Rigsby?
Yes.
I did notice on page 5 of 81, on that vote, there were actually 3 ayes and 3 noes listed, and then it stated passed with all ayes.
Yes.
I wasn't at that meeting, so I'm not sure how that should be corrected, but
Yeah. Great point, Vicky. So on the 3rd page, I think it is, Stephanie?
5th page,
5th page.
page 5 of 81.
3 of 8.
And 3, I believe.
I'll make that correction.
Yeah. Any other comments on the minutes? Okay. Now, I believe since there is a correction, we can approve pending that correction if there is a motion for that. So I'd entertain that motion if somebody wants to make it.
I would make it, but I wasn't at the meeting. I can say that there's a correction of that abnormality. I move that correction of that abnormality be made
I think that's fine.
to reflect the vote as carried out.
Okay. I have a motion by Commissioner Williams.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. We'll do a roll call vote on approval of the meeting minutes then with the correction.
Commissioner Byers?
Aye.
Commissioner Hall?
Aye.
Commissioner Rigsby?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay. At this time, if there's nothing else, we will open it up to public input. We do have one individual that's here today for public input. unless we're waiting on somebody else. Okay. If you'd want to come forward, raise your hand, state your name, and just right here to the microphone.
Howdy, my name is Carrie Morez, and I have been living in Ruidoso since 2013. I moved here in February. My grandson was born in 2012, and my kids both graduated from the high school here,
Yeah.
Warriors. So they left, and they're in Phoenix now, but they've been to California and Texas. They've just been traveling for 5 years. So I'm hoping that they can come back as soon as possible, because Phoenix and also Albuquerque and all the places, the big cities, are pretty terrible. I have been struggling with housing and homelessness since they left, but I've been managed to be here for 5 years, and I do catering, and I help people get to the hospitals. There's a lot of people who are need rides to Alamogordo and also Las Cruces. I'm very interested in the housing situation here, and I just wanted to be involved, and thank you for letting me speak. And I really wished that a friend of mine would have been here on time to just let everybody know that I'm that we are wanting to be involved and trying to plug back into the system, or me specifically. I had been not in the workforce for a while. I think it's been 2015 or so, 16, 17, or actually, but I've just been doing like odd jobs here and there, and like I said, I don't know how I've been making it, but I provide honey, raw and filtered honey, to the local people here, and we are, well, anyways, so the point is, housing is a very big deal yesterday we celebrated essential workers, and washing dishes is what I do the best, and I try to just stick with that, because it's something that I can do very well. With the water situation, I think I'm very thoughtful about how I use water here, and thank you for letting me be here, and I'm appreciative of all this information that you're providing for us. And I'm going to cut it here.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I just really appreciate that you
No.
guys are addressing housing here, affordable housing specifically. And
Yeah.
thank you. That's
No,
all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. I believe if you are interested in getting involved, there's a couple of different ways that someone can get involved within the village to provide feedback on housing. There is the Workforce Housing Board. I don't know if that's full or not, but there are methods through which you can provide feedback on either policy and/or get involved with the community. So that is available to you as well. And I'm happy, we're happy to follow up after this meeting with some of that information, if that would be great.
What is the board that might be available that we can participate in?
Yeah, so there's a Workforce Housing Board, and Sam, who's our Director of Development for the village, she would be able to give you more information on that. Anything you want to tell her, Sam?
Yes, so they meet bi-monthly. They'll meet again the last Thursday of this month. And they just take ideas, try to create different opportunities to spread information throughout the community for affordable housing. And so I would be happy, did you list a phone number?
I believe, yes, I did. Workforce Housing.
I'll be happy to contact you after the meeting and just give you
appreciate
any kind of information you may need.
Board. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Okay. I don't believe we have anybody else online that would want to do public input. So unless there is objections, I will close today's meeting and close the public input. Great. All right. Public hearing. The sixth thing we have on our agenda, the continuation of ordinances, amendments to Chapter 54 Land Use Division 4 zoning districts. This was the content, just for context for you. We went through I would say, we already went through one chapter last meeting, and we recommended approval of that to the village council. And this is another section that we're going through. Chapter 54 primarily covers land use, and that's the exceptions we see here at the planning board. And so today, I believe we have Phyllis on again. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good.
Good, good. I'm glad you're here with us. I think last time we were going through and we finished up with the residential districts in terms of providing feedback, and we were going to go into the land use table, as I believe where we were at. Were there any other changes that were made that we should be aware of?
No, I just sent you a new copy where I kind of highlighted the things that were new and the things that had changed so that you could just check those. And a lot of it you could see was just some reorganization and not so much changes. But the use regulations and the way they're being handled is a pretty big difference in how they were handled before. And what it does is it puts all of the uses in a single table. And what we found when we went through the chapter 54 was that there was duplication. There were uses that were called different things in different districts, and some uses that seemed kind of outdated and maybe a little too detailed. So I have two things that I wanted to show you related to the use table.
Okay,
That's Division 5. And the whole first piece of that explains how to use the use table is highlighted in yellow now. It's section 54, 55, and 56. And those are just explaining how to interpret the use table. But I also have
page 46.
provided to you a list of some of the categories that we thought were maybe too detailed and how we reclassified those in the use table. So I can go through those first, or I can just go through the use table. Do you have questions?
I see that we defined temporary, but I don't believe there was a use of temporary. Is that?
Yeah, at the very end of the use table is the
special
temporary
events?
uses.
Okay,
So it's things like special events that get permits and outdoor tent sales and things like that, carnivals, things that, there's a short list at the end.
yep, okay. I don't know if I have any questions. When I reviewed it earlier, it looked okay, but if there are the changes that you would like to highlight, I think now would be an appropriate time.
Okay, let me share my screen. So in the original chapter 54, there were, in different sections, there were some kind of detailed lists like antique store, arts and crafts. These are commercial land uses. And so we just have a general retail category, and it's defined in the definitions. And it's trying to consolidate these because it's kind of hard to anticipate what kind of store you might have. And really, they're all kind of general retail that could go in your commercial districts. So we kind of got rid of this level of detail when we could and called it general retail. We also added a shopping center category, which is the grouping of multiple shops in one building or on one site. Those are treated now as something that needs a site plan, and so we just call them out as a use.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Briley or Ms. Taylor, could I ask? Oh, now I went out of my Zoom. In that first section, now I lost my picture here for some reason. Hang on. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm getting a very important call. I'll get back with you guys. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
No problem. Thanks, Vicky.
Okay. And then professional office, it was
Okay.
defined as any kind of office, and so it includes a lot of different categories that are not retail, but are kind of office type service uses. Then we have personal and convenience services that would encompass beauty shops, barber shops, health studios, etc. And then convenience restaurant is pretty much the same. Then we added brewery, winery, and distillery that are new categories corresponding to the state statutes and regulations for locally produced wine, beer, and spirits. And then we called out bar and package liquor sales for consumption off-site. And we also have bar or nightclub. So they're distinguished between what's on-site and what's on-site activity and what's for sales off-site. And before, they were kind of grouped together. And then for industrial land uses, we introduced the idea of heavy industry, light industry, artisan industry, and sort of special things that might be a one-off, like a sewage treatment plant as an example. Although that would probably fall under utilities, but something that would be unusually impactful and you wouldn't see many of them. That's the special category. So things that were encompassed in the heavy industry that were in the existing code were contractor's office, body shops, welding shops, freight house or truck terminals. And then for light industry, things that were in the code would be like a mini warehouse, a lumber yard, or building material sales. Artisan is a new category, so it's not shown here. And special industry is a new category, so it's not shown here. And then for utilities in the existing code, they're all kind of called out one at a time. And we just split them into utilities major and utilities minor, and they were all governed the same way. So they still are governed the same way, and they're defined. So you have a list of the things that fall into utilities major and a list of things that fall into utilities minor, but you don't have to list them separately in the use table because they're all governed the same way.
So does the use for wireless telecommunications just go away? It's covered under,
No, it has its own ordinance.
oh, okay.
So it's regulated by its own ordinance, but it's also in the table. We didn't change
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And then I was misthinking when I was looking at industrial, here are the manufacturing categories. So we have a definition of manufacturing. We have a definition of the artisan manufacturing, the light manufacturing, the heavy manufacturing, and the special manufacturing, and kind of define what those include. And then things like custom dressmaking, furrier, millinery, or tailor shop employing 5 or more people, those came out and were placed by the artisan manufacturing because they're things made on site that are sort of low impact. And then assembly of products and processing falls into the light manufacturing category and is defined and is distinguished by things are in a enclosed building and don't give off noxious impacts to their neighbors. Then heavy would be kind of the more heavy processing that would have noise and odors, and you'd have to regulate those. And then special manufacturing is kind of the one-off that you would only have one of them, and they have potential hazards that you need to pay attention to. And then,
If I might, I'm back. I'd like to really quick ask that question
Okay.
that goes back to the beginning. I did see on there that convenience store was listed.
Yes.
We have come across a problem several times where the convenience store also sold fuel.
And we have a category for that.
I didn't see it in there. If you,
Okay, if we don't, we should, and it may be
it's
under.
up, go up a little further, I think, toward the top. In this initial, no, convenience specialty, no. Is there a, gosh, yeah, no, it's
Automobile-
not in there. If you could go back down to where you were, that's,
Yeah, let's look at that when we get into the table itself, because I
Okay.
could have missed some things.
okay.
Yeah,
Let's see. You know, we went through it several times and we're just trying to get rid of things that were so detailed and so unique.
Yes, I understand.
So recreation and entertainment, there were several categories that showed up in different districts. Sometimes not that consistent where they were located. So we broke it into entertainment, recreational, health and exercise facility indoor, and then the same thing for outdoor. And so these are the uses from the existing code here that would be indoor, and these are the uses that would be outdoor. And this way, when you get sort of a new type of outdoor entertainment, you're able to deal with it and not looking for things that are so specific as are shown on the left here.
so Phyllis, really great thing you bring up there. Currently in the ordinance, you can have a conditional use for a park or a public park in the residential zones. With this
Right.
language and update, we would be removing that ability. Is that accurate?
That's a good question. And let's see, when we get to the table. And is there anything else besides that would be conditional and residential that should be pulled out separate? Or just a public park?
Public parks, and then I believe churches are the other ones, but I didn't see if that was,
No, I think we left those alone.
those were in there.
Okay, so that's something to look for, that maybe a public park needs to be pulled out, and playground probably also then. And I think,
Phyllis, what about when those are developed with a new subdivision? Because we do have the requirement for open recreational space.
that would be the same thing, I think, whether you want it to have its own category in the subdivision or whether we should pull it out as a conditional use in a subdivision. So that's a good point.
Yeah, and then there's the question about, I guess, if they have an amphitheater at the public park, but that's kind of a separate situation, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, is there a way that you would want to distinguish between what you would put in a neighborhood and what you wouldn't?
That's why I was thinking like the amphitheater thing, if they ever did an actual theater there.
I mean, you could have the same issue if you had ball fields with lights,
Right.
but I don't know that that's what you would get in a neighborhood.
Right, I mean, we could just make public park playground conditional, but, I mean, how many times are we seeing a playground come in as conditional use? The only time that we've seen it in the last year was the workforce housing for the, and that was within a full package of development plan, yeah.
Yeah, for new ones, you might only see them in conjunction with a subdivision. Okay, so if we go back to the, whoops, this is not it. If we go back to the code and go through the list, So I've highlighted the things that are new and the changes in what's allowed and how. So we added a caretaker quarters so that a business could have a quarters for a caretaker on site. Otherwise, multifamily is now being allowed as a conditional use or a permitted use in commercial zones. So the need to carefully regulate housing in a commercial zone is kind of gone away. But we left the caretaker quarters in because you see it in the industrial zones also. Then hotel and motel and overnight campground, those used to be broken out by size, but then they seem to be regulated the same. So we just combined them. And do you have any thoughts about that? Because like in C3, it's a hotel is conditional because the idea, I think in the Midtown area was that they wanted things that were small scale. But that was true of some other uses too. And it just seemed like what regulates the size of things in that district is that it's platted into pretty small lots.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we have come across on this board previously was when it came to nightly rentals and the number. I think that it's permitted right now to have 4 or more units in the commercial zones. And it would be a conditional use or a variance for anything below that. So I think in terms of a number, that was the only instance where we had a distinction in the number. And the intentionality behind that clause, I believe, is to not have single night rentals in the commercial zone without coming through to this board. But I know that the nightly rental is managed through a different part of this ordinance that we already went through, I believe. So is there conflicting information between this update of usage and the nightly rental?
I don't think so. And Stephanie, Samantha, maybe you can answer whether the nightly rental regulation would have an impact here.
That's tough.
Airbnb type.
We're bringing a change to the nightly rental ordinance to P&Z in 2 weeks where we were provided direction from the governing body to allow for just a portion of a single-family residence to be rented. And so that's going to come before Planning Commission for comments, and then we'll take forward the comments to the governing body. And so that could change a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, I think whether it's rented or not rented is not part of this table. But that's governed for short-term rentals by the short-term rental ordinance.
Right. And in the ordinance, it states at the very front something about commercial. Short-term residential rentals are not commercial, but strictly a residential use of property under the village municipal code.
Yeah.
So that tells me that they should only be in residential. So it's almost like we need another line, but I don't know how you draw a line on that number. If I have a duplex and I do nightly rental in an R2 on both sides, I don't know how you draw the line in the sand there.
Do you see short-term rentals in your commercial districts where people have a unit?
We have seen it as of late. There have been folks that have purchased commercial property that's zoned C1, C2, and have been converting them to single cabin units. And our board to date has said that you need to have 4 or more units on that property if it's on a commercial lot. Because that was how the ordinance was read previously. because it broke up hotel motel and it said 4 or more units.
Yeah, they have that permissive as the hotel motel and detached cabin rentals, which is a conglomerative of a traditional lodging facility, and then conditional use approval for 4 or more, single dwelling units.
Right.
So should we split back up the cabin rentals and the hotel motels?
I think if I remember correctly, we were basing what was deemed a commercial enterprise based off of the number of units. So 5 or more, financing views that as a commercial property. So I can go buy a fourplex and Fannie Mae will support that loan. But as soon as I get a 5th unit on that property, I have to go get commercial financing from a credit union or bank. So the last time we talked, we were gonna draw the line there. And so I think it would be the same here. So 5 or
Okay.
more hotels, motels are permitted in C1. And then 4 or fewer would be conditional. Thoughts on that?
It's consistent with the other industries and when we're talking about, yeah, I agree.
I think that would help Sam and I a lot too when they come in. Well, it says cabin rentals, and then finding the definitions and, telling them within a logical term that a traditional lodger has multiples, that gives us at least a base number to work with.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so we'll split out under hospitality lodging. We'll split out cabin rentals from hotel motel. And then we'll have 5 or more follow the same.
Yeah, I mean, it could be just, instead of saying hotel motel or cabin rentals, it could almost be, we use the language short-term rentals. I know that might be confusing because we have a separate ordinance for short-term rental, but it's anything less than 30 days is the definition of a short-term rental. So if there's 5 or 4 or more units on a commercial lot, that could be permissive. But if it's 5 or fewer, that would only be for residential.
Wouldn't that be conditional?
Uh,
5 or fewer?
The 4 or fewer, as it states in the short-term residential right now, would be you could do it in any of the residential zones. So R1 through 4, if it's 4 or fewer.
Now, where you're talking about a commercial zone and having.
Right, and then for commercial, that would be just like a traditional hotel motel. Or like, there's 2 or 3 different cabin rentals that are on Sudworth. Those have 9 or more units, if I understand correctly. So it's a little bit different management to a certain extent.
I think just defining traditional lodging would be a minimum of 5 units and up would help clarify that.
Okay. Well, providing feedback to Phyllis, because she was going to break out cabins, but I don't think we have an issue with the name cabins. I think it's just the units.
Number of units
Yeah.
on the property.
Yeah, on the property. So maybe, Phyllis, we do hospitality and lodging, and it's broken out by, we could say short-term rentals, or we could say 5 or fewer units that would constitute a hotel, motel, or cabin would not be permissive in the commercial zone. And then 5 or more hotel, motel, cabins would be permissive in the commercial zone.
Okay, so should I move the 4 or fewer cabins or put them in the residential uses and they could still be conditional in the commercial districts? And then I could just say hotel, motel, cabin rentals, 5+ units or something like that. And they would be treated the same as any other hotel, motel.
I think that would work. Does that help you field the questions? So if it's like, this is in commercial, it has to be 5 or more unless, or you'd have to get a variance?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah. Yeah, that makes it at least a clear distinction.
Okay. Okay, and then in this category, we include the overnight campground and recreational vehicle park. And then under food and beverage, we have restaurant, a convenience food restaurant, the brewery, winery, or distillery, which are new, and a bar or nightclub. So we've added a restaurant as a permitted use in the mixed PUD where it wasn't before, but seemed consistent to the kind of uses that are allowed there. And then we have the brewery, winery, distillery permissive in the commercial zones except C4, which is heavier commercial, so that's conditional. And then in industrial, it's conditional, and then permitted in the PUDs.
Yeah. Quick question on that. I know that brewery, winery, distillery is regulated separately
Yeah,
in the state. Is there still a distinction between purchasing packaged liquor on-site and then consuming liquor or beer on-site? Because right
yeah,
now,
we have liquor for consumption offsite down here in commercial uses.
oh, okay, I see it. That makes sense.
So even if it's a restaurant that sells packaged liquor in the front, it's got to fall into this category.
Yeah.
And then I have a question. I put a P here, but I think that was a mistake. I think it should not be there. Is that right? Under the residential PUD?
I wouldn't think so.
I just think that's a mistake, that it shouldn't be there like that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, let me do this.
Were food trucks falling under convenience food, or where are those under?
With the food trucks? I think I put them in as an accessory use. That's a good question. They may be mobile vending. Okay, here's mobile vending. And it's conditional everywhere.
Drive up or drive through service window? So,
Is this what they mean, mobile vending? No?
so is there a reason it's not in C1?
Good question. Should it be?
The current code didn't specify it could be in a C1, it said C2 or C3.
Okay.
So I couldn't hear Stephanie.
She was just saying the current code doesn't allow for it right now.
Yeah.
What are your typical C1 locations that would want to have them, like a food truck?
Most of Southern and Meacham is C2. And then C3.
Okay, so what would be a C1?
So our C1 areas
Some along
are gonna
Paradise.
be behind
So-
the Shell station.
Okay,
They're intended for low-intensity retail combined with residential uses, so it's a buffer, so we're not slamming high uses into a residential. But we do have quite a few commercial developed C1s, but a lot of our C1s do house residential uses as well.
yeah,
All that stuff across from the tennis court and the fire station and all, is all C1,
That's
isn't it?
C2.
It's C2?
Oh, no, that is C1. It goes from there to,
Paradise?
it stops right at the independent signs. And then it goes into C2, I believe, and then that goes down, by where the little cabins are on the top of Paradise.
So I think there's a restaurant in the midst of all those, isn't there?
Yeah, that Mama Lucy's or whatever.
Yeah. So if we have, and are restaurants permitted uses within C1?
Or is it a conditional use?
I can
Restaurants are permitted.
pull up our zoning map.
I'm of the opinion to keep it consistent. If we allow a restaurant, then why not allow a food truck?
Right.
And the convenience food restaurants are not allowed in C1, and neither are some other uses that would have a drive-through window. But that wouldn't be a food truck.
Yeah, that'd be like Blake's Lot.
It'd be like McDonald's.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring it up here real quick so you all can see it.
Okay. 1 second, Phyllis. I don't know if you can see the screen, but she's pulling up the map for us. I assume. it's
Okay.
getting pulled up.
Phyllis, could I ask a question about you have a note over on the side, principal dwelling needs to be a long-term rental for an ADU. The ADU needs to be a long-term rental. What's ADU?
Oh, accessory dwelling.
Okay, thank
That'll
you.
show up under accessory uses.
But you have in there, the principal dwelling needs to be a rental.
Okay. Right.
Needs to be a long-term rental, or, you see what I mean? Oh, for an ADU to exist, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Right.
No, well,
What are those two brown
no,
lots?
that still doesn't work. You can't mandate that the principal dwelling is a long-term rental. I guess that's kind of how I'm reading that.
R2
And
is a transitional zone.
And this
Commissioner
goes
Williams,
back up.
Phyllis, do you mind just holding off 1 second? Because I think that the conversation you all are having is relevant for the
It's
large
separate,
group.
yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So let's
sorry.
wrap up the mobile vending, and then we can talk about the thought process we had with ADUs.
Well, and then these comments are anywhere in the document, it turns out. They don't have anything to do with this page.
Okay,
So if you have questions about those comments, we can go up to where they apply. But it's a different part of the code.
Right.
It's not this page.
So I think there was a question about the C1 that you had for Stephanie?
No, she answered my,
Okay.
I was just curious what those two brown.
R2 district that's placed there is due to the existing use of the property when they place the districts down. It's not necessarily a buffer.
Okay. Makes sense.
So
That's a-
under the commercial uses, there are several newish categories, and I know the cannabis ones are in the code already now.
Yeah, real quick, Phyllis, before we move forward, I think I would want to add mobile vending as conditional to C1. I don't think we ever closed the loop on that.
Okay. Okay.
Since we can allow restaurants, I think a conditional use for C1 is,
Yeah, if you got one restaurant in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's-
and then Commissioner Williams, you had a question about ADUs. Did you get that question answered?
Do you want to go to where that applies in the code?
It might be good because, Vicki, you were not present the last time we discussed this, were you? I don't know if you're on mute either, or if you're speaking.
I think I understand, I read the minutes, so I think I understand what your thought processes were in the situation. Did you really mean in R1 to mandate if they build an accessory building that is to be rented out, that the principal owner, the principal person in the original structure that's dwelling there, are you trying to make that should that be mandated to be
I
a
think this-
renter as well? Or
No.
is it just that the accessory dwelling can be used for long-term rental, but not short-term rental or lodging, as you defined it, I believe, of greater than 30 days?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that
go ahead.
was more of a comment, and here's where that comment or question is under the residential districts under single family.
Yes,
There's one principal structure per lot,
yes,
and then there's one accessory dwelling as a conditional use if it meets the standards for accessory structures.
right.
And then one accessory structure may be provided. Maybe this is extra. Maybe this doesn't need to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You can have one accessory structure. So that would be like a
Shed.
tool shed.
Right. The intentionality, Vicky, and if it's not in the ordinance, we should address it.
Okay.
The thought process was, if your primary residence, if you have a primary residence and add an ADU, you can rent that ADU out long-term. If you have a
Right.
long-term rental and you
Right.
add an additional
Well,
dwelling unit.
that's how I had read it in the minutes and everything, and I thought that's what I understood. And then I saw your comment about page 2, and I thought something needed to be changed about it, and I was concerned about the wording. But this is fine.
Okay.
As far as I could tell, it meets
Do
what
we
you
need to say
wanted.
something here about long-term, short-term?
There is one thing, a covered carport can at least 3 sides. The open portion of a covered carport can encroach up to 10 feet on the front yard setback. On the new setback structures for R1, what's the front setback, 15?
It is for R1 15.
Yes. So do you want to allow it to encroach?
I think that was the intentions, because if you can see through the carport,
It's not a building.
it's not a building. Correct, yeah. But,
And it's still going to have to meet, it's still going to have to be, this is the minimum setback, 15 feet.
Right, I mean,
Maybe this needs to be worded differently because
Yeah,
it says it needs to be
maybe it
at
should just be
least 10
consistent.
feet back from the property line. So maybe it can only encroach 5.
that's what I thought. That,
What kind of requests do you get?
Typically, we've been getting front encroachments for carports to get at least 10 feet into the 20-foot setback.
Okay.
And was that true when the front yard setback was 20 feet?
yes,
So it shouldn't be such an issue here if you make it 5 since the setback's only 15.
I think they were allowed to encroach such that their easement on a 20-foot setback was still 14.3 feet. So that's only 1/4 of the setback that they were allowed. This is a half. You want to go that far?
Yeah, I think maybe the difference is that when the setback was 20 feet, they still had 10 feet in front. But if the setback is 15 feet, they would not have but 5 feet between the carport and the property line.
Right. It's up to you guys. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, do you have thoughts about that?
I think maybe instead of encroach up to 10 feet, maybe it should say have a setback of 10 feet from the front yard property line.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So we can just say can encroach into the property line.
No, not encroach.
No, into the easement.
Into the
No,
setback.
not into an easement. You can't
Oh.
build into an
That
easement.
is the setback.
Setback.
It can
Or
be
that-
That is the
setback.
setback.
structure,
The
right.
easement is.
Just make it 10 feet and it's consistent.
Right.
Not having to deal with.
Yeah, it's not a,
Yeah.
an exception or something. That's just the
fair.
rule.
I think that's, yeah. Did you get that,
So what do you
Phyllis?
think, that it can encroach into the front yard setback
It's not
as long as
encroaching.
it's set back at least 10 feet from the property line?
The carport, you can remove the can encroach, but the carport can be set back 10 feet, right? Instead of the
The
15.
setback is.
The setback is, must,
the
yeah, there you go.
minimum setback is
setback,
10 feet.
There you go. Yep.
Okay, so is that okay, even though you have a minimum setback here of 15 feet?
Yeah, that's for a structure, that carport is specifying, an accessory use.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think that's
Okay, all right.
yeah, that's, yeah, then that makes sense.
Going back to the accessory dwelling unit, do we have, because part of what we tried to do last time was say that it had to be long-term rentals for ADUs if they were going to rent it out. Is that in this? I see that there is a.
I think it's a question.
Well,
And
it's a-
I do have the question of how you would regulate whether something is rented. I mean, you could say it couldn't be a short-term rental.
Yeah, I guess that's the intention. Before the ADU, it had to be your primary residence. And so we were trying to eliminate that requirement. And have, if you have the principal dwelling unit and an accessory dwelling unit, both can be long-term, but the accessory dwelling unit can't be short-term, I think was the intention.
Was to
But
permit
the-
the short term and only.
Sound
permit
good, but the
long-term,
principal
correct?
can be.
Each one should be short-term.
How do you regulate this in the short-term rental ordinance? So are you saying that if the principal dwelling is owner occupied, the accessory dwelling can be a short-term rental? But if it's renter occupied, it has to be a long-term rental?
That's how the current code reads. Last meeting, Jacob was, having discussions and asking for the, owner occupied to be struck through. And just basically having both structures be required to be long-term rentals.
Yes.
But the requirement of, primary residence of the applicant, was no longer a qualifying, factor for the conditional use.
Instead of rental, why not just long-term occupant?
Yes, I agree.
Because the occupant covers owner or renter.
True.
Yeah, I like that.
And then we need to define that.
What is a long-term occupant? 30 days or greater than 30 days?
Yes,
A
Yeah,
rental
but-
over 30 days, because short-term rentals are under 30 days.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
How does that work with the code changes, though, when they're allowed to rent a portion for short-term rental? Will the ADU be incorporated into that?
They'd still be,
It would still be restricted,
Yeah.
they'd still be long-term occupied.
because
What
you're
if they
asking.
wanted to rent one bedroom in their long-term rental?
Tough, then they get
If
rid
they
of their
have the
ADU.
ADU, it disqualifies them, because they had to get a conditional use permit to build the second dwelling. If it was a single residence, it would be permissive
Yeah.
upon the new changes.
Just
So
doesn't sound
how does the accessory dwelling
That's how Zach
work then?
emailed
Is
me.
it always have to either be a long-term rental or owner occupied?
Occupancy.
Currently, yes.
That was the intentionality of it. So on my personal residence, if I wanted an ADU, that should be reserved for long-term rentals to promote that, or for the care of like a mother-in-law or family member that lives there rent-free, as an example. I think that that's the.
Caretaker.
Or caretaker, yeah. Versus I buy a single-family residential cabin in the wherever in town, and then I add an ADU that's short-term rentals. It's basically doubling the number of short-term rentals on a property. And I think we wanted to avoid that for the ADUs.
Okay, I'll have to work on that language. So what you're looking at here is that
For
basically
the short term?
everything in the R1 district should be a long-term occupant.
For an ADU, very specifically. If you want to have an ADU,
You have to be its long-term.
then it has to be a long-term occupant, either by you or by someone else.
Yeah,
What about the principal dwelling?
Same.
long-term occupant also.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, because I've rented houses in residential neighborhoods that were Airbnbs.
Right, and we aren't trying to stop that by any means. I think that's the primary purpose, as our short-term rental overlay zone says, it has to be in a residential. I do see the conflict that you're getting at, Sam, where if it's your primary residence, if you're renting out a room, is that permitted? And in my opinion, yes. It would also be weird if you're renting it out to a tenant and then you're like renting one room while you have long-term tenants in there.
Subletting a room.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens in New York City all the time.
Yeah.
Yep, we'll be there.
I guess it'll depend on what the ordinance, the change to the ordinance states, right? Because in the ordinance change just says you shall have the ability to rent out a singular room in your residence, right? So I don't think it's in conflict.
And do you let people rent, you wouldn't let them rent out an accessory dwelling the same way?
I wouldn't.
I don't think that's the intentionality of a ADU. And like in R1, the look and feel shouldn't be to have multiple units in an R1 for people to come and go. Like, I don't think that's an R1 usage. I don't know.
Okay.
Because it does change the,
Character, oh, yeah,
Yeah, it
trust me,
does.
I know.
Yeah, me too.
yeah.
Okay, so when we get to accessory uses,
Big time.
we should check how that looks in the table.
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking, just make sure we clarify it.
Yeah.
the A, what does the A stand for again? Accessory.
Accessory.
So all accessory is required to have a conditional, like we have to approve it? Planning and zoning,
Yeah, you approve them as accessory uses.
okay.
And this is making me think we probably need to look at what process we're setting up for accessory uses, even if it's to say that it just goes through the same process as a conditional use.
Yes, if we could clarify that. We have one that just came up the other day that wants to put a drive-up window.
Yeah. Okay, so going on in the commercial, the cannabis is just coming from your cannabis ordinance. Then the liquor for consumption off-site, we've added separate from a bar. And then the shopping center is new. Tobacco sales is added because there's a new-ish state law about tobacco sales. And so they have to be authorized, they have to get a zoning approval through the village. So we've added them in here as a use. And then the office and the personal and convenience services. And basically, these are new, but they're following where they were allowed and where they were conditional, those types of uses in the existing code. And then financial institutions are conditional in C1, and that's because they tend to have drive-through windows, permitted in C2 and C3, and then conditional in the more heavy commercial industrial districts. Club and meeting facility, these ones all were already listed in the code, and this is where they were allowed. Do you have any questions about any of those?
I have one back up at automobile fuel sales. And it's not so much a question, but a comment.
because I see electric vehicle charging becoming something that is gonna be,
with those.
more and more prevalent with the trend of automobiles and, is that part of fuel sales, automobile fuel sales, or will that be, because I could see, fueling stations at nightclubs and restaurants and things of that nature, you pull up and you plug in and while you're eating and things of that. Anyways, it might be something to address now instead of having to go back.
Can we put slash charging stations, Phyllis?
I would put those in as an accessory. And I don't know that would you want to see where those are going or just make them permitted in all the commercial or non-residential districts?
Yeah, I think there's a difference in scale.
There is.
If I'm going to a restaurant, or I think we gave Allsups the ability to put in electric.
Yeah.
There's
But they're a
hotels.
fueling station already.
Yeah,
We did.
and there's hotels, but like having Tesla come and pave a parking lot and put up a specific electric charging station, I think is different than having it at a property that's already there. So maybe it is accessory.
Or break it out so that you can fill it in later.
Right. That's fair.
I mean, there's too many questions right now as to the way the industry's gonna go.
Well, I think this
Try
is
to
one of the
answer
hardest
that,
pieces, this use table.
Yeah.
But I would, make a spot for it.
Perhaps could we change it to say automobile fueling sales? Would that take care of the difference
already done.
between gas and
Just as
electrical
fuel.
fueling
It's just that electric
stations?
could be done in a lot of different places.
Right,
Yeah,
but I
but
think that's already.
you can get an electric charging station that's just in a parking lot with parking spaces designated for electric
Right.
vehicles.
They are
I-
all over in California, restaurants, office
that's already covered,
buildings,
though.
they're everywhere.
Well, so you have to get, unless I'm mistaken, I mean, it's just a 220 that they're running to somebody that can plug it in. So I do think there's validity in having it, if it's a dedicated fueling service, that's different than having it at a,
Accessory
home.
for a restaurant or.
right, exactly. I would agree with that. So if it's a dedicated, like, is an automobile fuel cells is a dedicated category.
How about a fueling station, electric fueling station?
Yeah, so if it's dedicated, maybe that, we include it in that.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Well,
I just,
The only place I can think of that would have something like that is a parking lot for somebody's fleet,
Well,
like the state of New Mexico having a fleet lot.
the Tesla has dedicated parking lots with charging stations, and so does Rivian, another manufacturer. And so it looks like just a parking lot, but it's only for people to come in there and charge. And so I think we would want to have say in where that goes versus if you pull one at your restaurant.
Should we just have parking lot in here somewhere?
I could see if I were a restaurant owner and, wanted to put in 4 or 5,
True.
to augment,
Yeah.
it's like I'm gaining an extra buck off of them sitting there parking while I'm also, it is another commercial.
Providing a service.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how
Anyways,
to.
I don't know what I still think you ought to just set it aside and make block out
Yeah, a part
whatever you
for it.
want to call it, and then we can fill in the blanks later.
Like
Stephanie,
electric car
Sam, does-
charging stations.
Yeah.
It seems like you could just add a parking lot in here. And it wouldn't matter if it had charging stations or not, but any kind of commercial lot or even the city lot would be a
It's
use.
the
That
charging
would be,
stations themselves that
Yeah, that's what you want to.
address. Because it could be almost anywhere. The village, I mean, you could do them up and down the street in Sudreth.
Primary
I
parking,
can see that, like they used to have parking meters, and
Yeah, instead you
pull
have
up
a
and,
an EV charging station.
yeah, EV charging, you plug in and,
Well, maybe you just have an item that, since it's still evolving, you know.
yeah, and that's why I say just block
Is
out
that able to do that?
EV charging and then to be determined.
Yeah, something, at least leave a.
Yeah,
at least
leave a
mention that
slot for it is all I'm
Right.
saying.
The thought's
And then,
there, and we don't know what it's gonna
yeah,
come down to
exactly.
20 years from now, but also give the flexibility for if a restaurant or somebody or a business wants to add it as something to draw people in.
Right.
So Phyllis, you'd recommend adding that as an accessory use?
Well, sometimes you have a parking lot that's just the use, like the city lot
Right.
or the village lot. And it seems like if you did that, then it would cover any sort of commercial lot that was not associated with another use.
I just,
Do you want to just add a line?
just add a
Electric
line,
charging.
EV charging, sales.
Okay.
But if
Yeah,
you made it-
specifically
if you
sales,
made
I think
it-
also makes a difference too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. So,
If
automobile.
you added the parking lot, it wouldn't make a difference if it had EV charging stations or not. It would just be that use of a parking lot
Right, and I
as the
think
primary use.
the difference is that if you're selling the ability to charge,
Right.
of a
regulated
conditional use of a parking lot.
yeah. I mean, that, we could do that, but I think if they're selling, charging hours, watts, I don't know how they describe the unit, then that should be broken out. is what
Do
Bob
they
said.
all sell the power?
What's that?
Not the ones in your home, but
Not the ones at home, but if you stop off somewhere, like supercharging stations, they charge you per minute that you're plugged in.
Yeah.
And then
Like
there's,
filling up with gas.
it's exactly like filling up with gas, and you have variable levels of charging capacity. If you
Yeah.
pay for the premium version, you can charge faster than the basic version. So I think that's valid if you're selling it,
Yeah, if you're selling, it's a business.
right?
And all I'm saying is be proactive and, because it is coming. If you don't address it today, you will tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look up and see what examples I can find of that, if any, and then maybe it'll have a
wording.
help for how they describe them.
I think that'd be good.
Because I think we would have to add definitions and make sure that it's consistent everywhere in the code.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just in Savannah and my friend and I were like, oh, I don't see any charging stations. And like not a minute after we said that, we saw parking lots with charging stations, on-street parking places with charging stations. They had them everywhere. We just didn't notice them.
They have a couple done
Phyllis, as you're scrolling through, I'm noticing quite a few discrepancies on the use tables. There's a lot of commercial activity showing to be conditional or permissive within the RPUD. I think it got shifted. Commercial activity shouldn't be in the RPUD.
Okay, yeah, they should, I'm not sure
That
what
should be
happened
in
with
the
these.
Mixed use and the industrial. I think it just meant to scoot over one.
Okay, oh, so everything should have been, all of this should have been shifted over one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
That's kind of what it's appearing like to me.
all right.
For the PUD stuff?
Yeah, because the RPUD is strictly residential uses. The MPUD allows for residential and mixed, and then industrial is strictly commercial.
Okay.
Because you've got an RV.
I think she's right. I think these got shifted over.
Yeah, it's not really a change in the use, it's just the way it fell in the
Yeah.
tables modified.
The other thing I noticed going through here is that we don't have we separated an animal hospital or clinic with an open animal run and without. And I'm thinking that the animal hospital with the open animal runs just needs to be the same as a kennel with open animal runs.
Yep.
I would believe that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the reason why those are is just because the animals are outside versus inside.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
You can see me making like typing errors here. Do you see anything else?
No. So far, everything
Yeah,
other than
it's
that was
page
good.
38.
So when we get to industrial uses, we've got the artisan, light, heavy, and special manufacturing. Those generally follow where the types of uses were allowed before.
Yep.
And then the cannabis and cannabis courier, those come out of the cannabis ordinance. So is this cannabis courier look right to you, Stephanie and Sam?
Yeah, that's how our code reads it right now.
Yeah, we
I'm
don't
not
want to
sure
be in
if-
conflict with it unless there's a reason to change it.
But the retail shops have courier service, so it's kind of,
Yeah.
Because we have a C2 use that actually
Is a
does his own
principal.
courier.
we should put it as principal permitted use in the
But he's
C.
not advertising, it's like a personal courier service, they're not delivering it.
They do.
Maybe.
Oh, I thought he was saying
It's-
that it's just to pick up his own product, not to bring it to people.
No, they deliver.
Like Grubhub.
Yeah.
So
of
should
them
we
deliver.
change
Should
this?
join
About 20 or
forces.
30 minutes, depending.
It's not like a mobile vendor, but they deliver
He
the
was here, he
product.
said he had a courier license, but they didn't do home deliveries, it was just to transport from his supplier here.
You're thinking about Arnold Duke?
Yeah, that's what he said during the public hearing.
But
And
that-
he said he was the only one with a courier's license in Ruidoso.
That was for like bulk or something to
Okay,
do with
so
the
that's not the
manufacturing.
same that we're talking about right now.
No,
Okay, okay.
And it's not retroactive, right? So if we said it's not permissive in C2 right now, if you're doing it and you got permission, you're fine, right?
because, well, the reason I never
would make
really
it a
thought about
permit,
it,
yeah.
the medical, like OSO and all the ones that were already doing it for medical, it was already happening.
Is it,
Would you want to see it changed?
why would we have, like, manufacturing has the ability or could impact the exterior or external properties? Does a courier service impact that?
Because it's almost like telling Pizza Hut you can't deliver your pizza, your product.
Yeah,
They're both legal products, so.
so maybe it just follows the same usage as the manufacturer,
I would make it permitted.
Or
do it permitted?
permitted under retail, because it'd be a retail service. Yeah. a service of the
I'm
retail.
comfortable with that.
Should we make it a accessory use?
I don't know if we need to.
Not necessarily.
I think it needs to move under retail, not necessarily manufacturer.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes more sense if it's retail.
And I think using the cannabis retailer as a template would be
Yeah, 'cause
appropriate.
you've got it, yeah, because your cannabis retailer is permitted C1, C2.
Maybe not C3. I don't want trucks blocking up Sudreth, but that's just selfish of me because I drive through there all the time. I already get annoyed by FedEx because they're blocking a lane.
So here's what the cannabis retailer looks like.
Yeah,
So we would just make it the same?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Just
And then the rest of these are pulled from the existing code, and we just left them as separate uses.
And it took us half an hour to leave the city because of the traffic. It's crazy.
Yep.
So for public institutional uses, churches were conditional and residential, as were schools, public buildings. And then I think churches were not permitted in other districts, but we made them permissive in the non-residential districts. And it should probably be, conditional here in the PUD, right?
There's a whole bunch, yeah. This might be, I don't know. What's an institutional use? What's the definition of that?
Institutional use?
Yeah. Yeah. I would just argue that churches shouldn't be in that category, but that might be nitpicking, to be completely honest with you, because it is not a public, I guess it could be considered a public building, but in some cases it's not.
Churches aren't open to the public?
Some are not.
Some are not.
I guess I've never met an unpublic church.
Yeah. Specifically, certain temples are not open to the public. It's nitpicking. I don't know if anybody would raise an eyebrow at that, but, and the uses look fine to me, so.
Where would you put them? I mean, they're an institutional use, I guess, even if not public.
Yeah,
And the other things in there are other non-school instructional centers, trade schools, and the airport falls in there.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of a catch-all, so I'm not, again, I don't think we need to make any changes.
Okay.
Just ignore me, Phyllis.
Now, this is the time. This is the time to bring this stuff up. Okay, so this is where we have the park issue, right? So do we want to add park as its own use? But does it need to be a public park or any park?
I think that was the intention, but if there's a new development, the open space would be provided to the residents of that subdivision. So that, I guess that's where it gets confusing. But I think public parks should be allowed in any residential lot, or any residential zoning. If somebody has a lot that they're not using or a series of lots and they want to donate it to the city and make a park, if the city accepts that, I don't have a problem with it. I don't know if that happens very frequently, but
Would you make it conditional?
yeah, I mean,
That way they have to bring in their site plan.
right.
That's, yeah, I kind of like the idea of it being
least you have an idea
conditional.
what-
It's allowed, but not just,
And then parking and making sure it's
yeah.
not.
And then otherwise it would be permitted just the same way that the entertainment stuff is. And probably,
Yeah,
and then since we're pulling it separate from the outdoor, it could match how it's allowed with the indoor facilities, because I think it has a different impact than some of these bigger outdoor recreation facilities.
yeah, I think that that's fair.
And then the shooting range was, I believe, in the old code. But it wasn't, we pulled it out separate and made it conditional in the commercial and mixed PUD
I think that looks good.
or industrial PUD. Maybe this isn't right either. No, industrial, yeah. And then the utilities, major and minor, are just conditional everywhere. And then the wireless telecommunications, those should probably also be conditional. Is there anywhere that you don't allow them? I'm not sure if federal law,
No, we just have to have the conditional use approvals to ensure, the regulations of self-collapsing, the, setbacks, the height restrictions, any camouflaging requirements, all of those types of things are addressed.
okay. Okay, so we just need to make it conditional everywhere. And then here's how we have the accessory dwelling units. They're accessory in all the residential zones. They don't need to be accessory. Well, we didn't put them in the mobile home zones. Should we?
Right now, the way
The
the
lots
code
are
is,
pretty small.
that's only, ADU was only for the R1, because R2 already supports a two-family, R3
And
is
there's,
for intended of higher uses.
yeah, and I think there's specific language in M1 already. I think M1 refers to R1.
Yeah,
For
it allows
accessory
for a
uses.
single family, but it doesn't allow for two structures per lot unless you develop a mobile home park.
Okay,
I thought there was some language in there that said,
In the M1?
yeah,
Did I mess up?
maybe it's not in this one. I thought when I was reading it the other day, M1 allowed for R1 accessory usage.
it might. Let me go back to that.
I don't see an issue having accessory units for M1 or M2.
Okay. The only reason where I think you wouldn't is if the lot's too small, but then you
Right.
wouldn't allow it.
Setbacks are,
This shows principal permitted uses, mobile homes and single-family detached dwellings.
What does it say for excessive, for
It doesn't,
conditional or?
for conditional use, it's multifamily dwellings, not to exceed 8, bed and breakfasts.
I thought we were taking that out.
Yeah, well, this is what the current code has.
Oh.
It doesn't refer to R1 standard, like he was saying with the accessory uses.
On page 58 of 81, it says accessory dwelling units are only allowed in the R1 district and must receive conditional use in that they may not be used as a short-term rental. And the owner of the primary residence must live on site.
that's what it says currently.
The new one.
Under
So
the
owner doesn't
definition?
have to live on site.
We should take that out.
Yeah, no, they do. Owner of the primary, yeah, page 58.
Yeah, and I think that that's what we were trying to get rid of, so that if it's long-term occupant, you could have an ADU and if there's a long-term occupant in both, or there's a owner occupied in one. But it says ADUs may not be used as short-term renter. Yeah, it's
Okay,
C that we need to
here's-
get rid of on page 58.
Yeah, here's where it is. It's under the use-specific requirements.
Is this the current one? Oh, no, this is
Yeah, this is the current one.
the one that we're updating. Yeah, I think C is what we talked about removing last time on page 58, under bullet 1, right?
Do you want to replace it with anything?
I just put owner / occupant.
Well,
Phyllis, it's whatever you think the best language is. What we're saying up here was either owner / long-term occupant. I know that you were going to define long-term occupant, weren't you? Or are we not doing
Greater
definitions?
than 30 days. Chairman Rigsby,
Yeah,
what was the real desire in doing this? Because essentially what you're saying now is R1 can have 2 homes on it. So we might as well have done that when we did the rezoning criteria, if you're going to do it this way, because there's no control over it. If you allow 2 renters on that property long-term over 30 days or not, where's the control?
I think with
At least with
accessory,
short-term rentals, we have a management service that has to be answerable.
I'm going to need clarification on that last one about short-term management and how management comes into play. But I think the intentionality of this was to state and to increase density where it makes sense. With accessory units, they have to come in and we have to give approval for the accessory unit. So there is a check and it's not just open to anybody.
So it isn't really that you're trying to make it such that the owner of a property can build a unit for their mother, grandma, and whatever, whoever in the family needs to live there, or good friend, whatever it is. You're really trying to, if it was that, I understand. If you're really trying to take R1 and say you can have 2 homes on them and rent them both out long-term, why don't you just do it that way? Because that's essentially what you're doing, right?
It's restricted by lot size.
Yeah, there's restriction
Well,
by
of
lot
course, it
size.
is anyway,
Right.
even if it's,
I think the intentionality behind the changes that we're proposing was to increase density so that it could be for more long-term rentals in town. So the thought process was, I have 2 condos across town that I'm renting both sides out long-term. And this is not a perfect example, but imagine it's just 1 unit in an R1. I would want to be able to add another unit, even though it's not my primary residence, and then have the ability to rent that out long-term. Or I could give it to a family member that is there on site. And so my folks are getting older, maybe I give them the ADU, and I still have a long-term rental covering the mortgage, as an example. So,
well, once again, though, I say, why don't you just state R1 may have 2 dwellings present and change the zoning, because that is essentially what you are doing, whether you're primarily living there and renting one or renting both of them.
Yeah.
The zoning states 1 dwelling, you just made it 2.
I think the difference is that the R2, it's permitted, and the accessory unit in this case would have to come for a conditional use. So if lot sizes don't add up, if there's pushback from the community, if there is other aspects that don't allow for an ADU.
It's just not open for everybody.
Right.
The original intent that was brought forth in 2019, when this was brought to the commission to allow for that, was to put in regulations to discourage any type of short-term rentals and to promote the long-term rental housing crisis that we have, and to help the regulations by the primary structure was in the event that you had a really huge house, you've gotten older in age, now it's just you, there'd be nothing that would necessarily hurt anything by putting up a firewall. Now it gives you a second dwelling unit, and you can use that as a caretaker or a long-term rental, because you yourself don't necessarily need such a big house. That's how it was presented and adopted back in 2019.
Right, but once again, it means that in that statement, the owner of the property lives in one of the dwellings, is a full-time resident of one of the dwellings.
Right. Certainly understand that. I think the intention was just to open it up for properties that are currently being used as long-term, and not necessarily the owner living on the property. So that was the thought process. I mean, I'm more than happy for a vote, I guess, on if we want to include it or not, or, I do understand what you're saying, Vicki. The intention isn't to replace R1 with R2 by any means. I think it's just to open up R1 to additional uses.
But that,
I understand you have the best of intentions,
but does the
And you want this to go in a certain direction, but you must realize people are people. And if you leave it this way, we will have lots R1 bought up all over town so that 2 dwellings can be built on it and rented out again by somebody who isn't interested in this village other than its money.
Well, I'd like to make a comment on that.
Yeah.
We need more workforce-type housing. And if you're
I agree
building
with
an
that. I don't
auxiliary
dis-
housing unit on a lot, it can only be of smaller origin, which is only going to attract the working person. And just like the lady that, the only public comment we had today, you know, there is that crisis in this community. There is a big
Yes,
need.
but it's not because there aren't homes for rent. It's because they're being bought up and utilized as short-term rental instead.
I agree.
There will
I
not
agree.
be any kind of restriction put on that, will there?
That's why we want the long
Okay,
term.
I've said my word. You guys, you know, but that's how I feel about this.
We're totally in agreement. I don't think anybody is opposed to that statement. And I think the statement, the point B eliminates any short-term rentals, so that this is really intended for long-term exclusively. There is a reality that unless you have more units on a property, it doesn't make financial sense to make it a long-term rental. My current property, if I didn't break it out between 2 units in the same building, it wouldn't cash flow as a long-term rental. And so my options would either be to sell that to another family for their primary use or to convert it into a short-term rental. And so
But you're
having,
talking about condominiums, and that is not R1. You're talking about condominiums, that's not R1. If
I'm
you
talking
have
about
a
my primary residence.
duplex?
It's in R1. It's in Upper Canyon. I can add an accessory dwelling unit on the first floor. So my folks that, when they get up there in age, I think that was the intentionality of the original.
Part of it, yeah.
Or to
but
allow a college students or whatever to come in and rent your home.
So I think your concerns are valid, and I think we tried to address them, Vicki. I don't think we wanted to open it up to short-term rentals, and that's why we have the statement in B. And I think the only difference was if you already have a long-term tenant in a cabin or in a property in town, adding that ADU would allow for another unit there. But we would still have control over it because it would have to come to the board.
And what would be your criteria for approval or rejection then?
Setbacks, parking,
Right.
neighborhood.
Size of,
area,
yeah.
size.
Feedback from the comment, or from the community.
Neighbors and-
Yeah.
Yeah.
By allowing a conditional use, it allows you to place the restrictions on
Restrictions
there,
on
so
it.
you're not changing the dynamics.
Yeah,
of
it's
the
just not
neighborhood.
I
permitted.
guess that goes to just one, I know when we have, or when I get notifications of short-term rentals next to my place, I noticed there's kind of the notification is for like 200 feet, but I remember when they had one of the rezoning, someone was wanting to go from R1, there's only a 100-foot notification if somebody wanted to rezone something. Why are those notification distances not consistent?
They are now, yeah, with this.
Are they now?
We're gonna change
Okay,
everything
then maybe I
to
was reading
200.
old stuff. because
Yeah,
it-
rezoning is the only one that had a 100 district, but still everybody within a 200-foot notice got a letter.
Okay, well, yeah, because I read it somewhere, and that's where I said, that's where that question came from. So
Yeah.
as long as it's
We
consistent. in
proposed
the-
a change to make
okay.
sure all of our hearings have all the
All
same requirements.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Just for the sake of time on this one, I'll entertain a motion to add the owner or longtime occupant of the primary residence lives on site. The language could be judged, if you will, but the motion is the owner does not necessarily have to live on site. It could be a long-term tenant.
Why don't you just say the primary unit must be occupied by long-term?
Right.
Perfect.
Regardless of whether they're owner or not, just,
Yeah.
Did you guys want to vote on that?
I think so. I think there's enough contention.
I move that we change the language to long-term occupant for ADUs and primary resident of that
Okay.
property.
There's a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. We'll do a quick roll call vote. Stephanie?
Commissioner Byers?
Aye.
Commissioner Hall?
Aye.
Commissioner Rigsby?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
She left. So we don't have a
Oh, when
quorum.
did she leave? Okay.
Well,
So we can't.
we lost our quorum. So
So
much for
Phyllis, we're gonna
that.
see you again next month, unless we want to, can we
Well,
add this? to
I
the-
think it would be worth going through this because we're finding little stuff all the way through
Yeah,
and then bring it back next month anyway.
okay.
Is that okay, or are you guys?
I think so.
We'll just let the record reflect that we lost our quorum at this time and then keep going for changes, but not make a motion to adopt any of them.
We had a quorum and it was still going to pass.
Yeah, I guess we gotta adhere to
I
it.
can't confirm she was on at the
Yeah.
time the motion was made, though.
Yeah.
I didn't see when she actually left.
She
except for at
abstained.
3:24.
I will, I'll entertain a motion to continue this at the next public hearing. I think we have to we have to have a motion to move on, from here. But can we vote on it if we don't have a quorum? So we're
We can't
done.
do anything.
Alright.
It'll just go into continuance because we didn't finish the
Okay.
chapter.
We have to call the meeting now.
Well, I guess we have to call the meeting.
Dinner, all right.
None of the rest of the items are action items.
Right.
So do you want to just continue it next time?
Yeah, sorry about that, Phyllis.
No, that's okay. I think we've done enough changes that it's not a bad idea anyway. I would just ask, the only thing left are the accessory uses, of which drive up we've added as an accessory use. And this says where it's allowed and it would all need to have approval. And then the family childcare home was added. And then we added for the temporary uses, outdoor sales, circus, carnival, and special events. And then you might want to look through the use-specific standards. And the way this is going to work is these little X's here in the end will be links to the specific use. But just be sure that you don't see anything that stands out in those use-specific standards. Because a lot of the sort of detail of what should and shouldn't be allowed shows up here.
Okay. All right, well, thanks, Phyllis. We'll take it up next week. We're gonna have to close this meeting because we don't have a quorum. We do have a new commissioner. We're missing most of the board now, but would love it if you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we can wrap this
Sure.
up.
Sure, just as a point of introduction, my name's, it's William Hall on the plaque, Bill Hall. William is what my mother used to call me when I got in trouble, which I think all of us are used to. I've recently retired here in Ruidoso as of last year. Worked for a
She is back.
Fortune 500 mining company for the better part of 35 years. But fell in love with this part of the world back in the late 1980s and found a way to retire here and somehow put my name in that, oh yeah, you want to volunteer for something? And, but I've been on planning and site development for, most of it was industrial minerals, all in urban residential areas that, all I can say is even the last contentious one you had here was not even close to some of the ones I've had to sit in over the years. So I look forward to helping shape the future in a positive way. So let's, hopefully be a legacy for, leaving the village in a better state than when I came. So,
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome,
yeah,
Bill.
enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm Jacob Rigsby.
Jacob.
I was born, raised here in Ruidoso. Left for 12 years or so.
Yeah.
And then just moved back 2 years ago. And I work remotely for a software company. My folks are here, my sister's still here, and my folks have been here for 30-something years. So this has been home, and my wife works down at the hospital.
Oh, cool.
Bart, you want to give your introduction, or do you know Bill?
I just from, in passing, but, Bart Byers, I moved here in 79 for the first time, back and forth a few times till I could stick, and I've been here 30-something years straight now, and done small development around town, everything from apartments, movie theater, dry cleaners, burger business.
Yeah, there's very few places left there's few in Midtown that were here when I first came through in 1988, the first year I was in Ruidoso. And, yeah, I'm sorry to see, what was it, JJ's Barbecue was up for sale, gone. That was the only barbecue place at the time in the 80s, so.
Yeah. WPS is still here. Not a plug for them, but that staple's not going anywhere, you know?
The only thing that's changed with them is you can't drive through the window and get beer.
That's the big difference, yep.
That's the only change.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Williams, Vicki, are you on?
Yes, I think you guys cut my internet connection at just the right time.
Well, we were wrapping up because we lost quorum because we thought you left us, so.
Not on purpose.
Okay, well, can we go back to that vote? And then I think we should wrap for the day. Phyllis has a number of talking points and we'll have to come back to this. I think when we were there, we were doing a roll call vote. Did you hear the full motion, Vicki?
No, I didn't.
Okay,
The motion proposed by Commissioner Byers was to strike and change the word from owner or long-term occupant of the primary structure for the ADU. It was seconded by Commissioner Hall, and I was here for recording your vote.
Nay.
Motion does carry.
thank you. Thank you, Vicki.
Yep.
And I think we can now vote to table this, do a continuance?
Yeah, and then the next meeting day is.
The 12th, right? Yeah,
No, Friday.
June.
Friday,
That's,
for this.
No, I know, but I'm just saying.
for in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant to bring this back. I'm like, I didn't advertise this.
No, no problem. So, yeah, we'll come back to this in June. then.
So I move that we table this topic till next month's regular meeting.
Great.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call?
Commissioner Byers?
Aye.
Commissioner Hall?
aye.
Commissioner Rigsby?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Great.
Motion carries.
I will entertain a motion to skip the remaining agenda items, if that's okay with the group, unless there's
So
a,
moved.
okay? And then I'll entertain a motion for adjournment,
So moved.
okay?
Second.
We'll move. Second. Any discussion? I think we'll just do a vote by voice. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed.
All opposed? Thank you. All opposed?
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Phyllis.
Bye.
Thank you for jumping back
Didn't mean
on,
to make
Vicki.
it hard
I
for
really
you, Phyllis.
appreciate it.
Oh, this is the most tedious part, I think.